The night the crowd rose to its feet for him, Dean Martin learned that his son's plane had disappeared from the radar. And in spite of that, he took the microphone and said words his fans still can't forget. Late 80s Vegas wrapped itself around the casino showroom, warm amber lights, a ceiling stained with years of smoke, a sea of small round tables glinting with glass and chrome. Ice knocked against crystal. Laughter skipped across the room in quick bursts. The house band filled the gaps with a soft, practiced swing that had long ago stopped needing sheet music. Dean stood in the center of it all, in a dark, perfectly cut suit, tie straight, shoes shining. The famous half-smile rested on his face, like it had grown there. From the back of the room, he looked exactly as the posters promised. The old pro, steady as ever, silhouette carved cleanly out of the haze by the overhead spots. The crowd saw the legend. No one saw the father who had just been called to the phone. He'd finished a song, bowed, tossed off a line that drew a wave of applause. While the band shifted into the intro of the next number, a figure appeared in the right wing, stage manager, headset crooked around his neck, face drained of color. He caught Dean's eye and gave the smallest of signals. A quick tilt of the head, a hand lifted toward the side curtain. "Come here. Now." Dean let out a chuckle into the microphone, said something offhand about checking whether the bar was still open, and ambled toward the edge of the stage to a ripple of laughter. From the tables, it looked like improvisation, an old dog playing with his marks. At the curtain, in the narrow strip of shadow, the music dulled to a muffled throb. The stage manager leaned in close, voice low and rough. "Dean, they just called from LA military base," he said. "They say there was an incident." Dean Paul's jet went off the scope. "They've lost contact." The words jammed up, half-formed. "No radio. Search. Doesn't look good." They didn't say crash. They didn't dare. For a second, everything in him went blank, the way a television screen does when the picture cuts and leaves only a gray hum. He blinked once, slowly. The band was still playing his cue. He nodded, a small, almost polite motion, because he had nothing else to offer that wouldn't topple him. The man watched his face like someone bracing for a falling tree. Dean turned back toward the light. There was no time to sit, no quiet room, no corridor to walk until his legs understood what his ears had heard. There was only the distance from the wing to the center microphone and the roles waiting for him on either end of it. A man who had every right to collapse, and an entertainer who, by contract and habit, did not have permission to let his voice shake. The hall came back at him in pieces, the slope of the front tables, the glint of a camera lens, a woman in sequins lifting her drink. Someone near the stage shouted, bright and casual, "We love you, Dino." He reached the stand, set his hand around the microphone with deliberate care so no one could see the tremor, and straightened his tie as if fussing with it for effect. His throat felt dry as paper. He swallowed once, the motion barely visible. The band eased down, waiting. Hundreds of faces tilted up, relaxed, expectant. And in that breath, standing under the soft gold of the spotlights, with his heart somewhere thousands of feet in the dark over California, he spoke a single line. The people in that room would carry it with them for years, repeat it to friends, write it down in letters and memories as proof of who he was on stage. Only he knew, in that instant, how much it cost to force every syllable past the storm that had just opened inside his chest. Months before that night in Vegas, the noise in his life was softer. Morning in Los Angeles rolled in pale through the kitchen windows. Newspapers lay half-folded on the table, a coffee mug leaving a dark ring on the counter. On one chair, a flight jacket, casually thrown, patches catching the light. It didn't belong to Dean. Dean Paul crossed the room with the loose stride of a man who trusted his own balance. Flight bag over his shoulder, collar open, smile quick and easy. The boy, who'd once fallen asleep in backstage armchairs, now carried himself like someone who had traded footlights for cockpit gauges. "You sure those things know how to stay in the air?" Dean asked, watching him pour cereal as if they were talking about the weather. "The jets or the pilots?" his son shot back. "'Cause the pilots are the charming part." Dean huffed, lips twitching. "I sing, you fly. One of us ought to pick a safe profession." "Come on, Pop," Dean Paul said, nudging his shoulder. "Your job has more smoke than mine." They joked like that often, about risk, about schedules, about who spent more time away from home. Underneath the banter, something heavier lived, an older man's unease in a world of thin wings and high speeds. Dean had seen newsreels, heard about training runs that ended in silence. He knew how quickly routine could turn into an anniversary no one wanted. Once, standing in the doorway as his son adjusted a cuff on that olive flight suit, Dean almost said, "If you ever feel off, you walk away from the plane." Instead, he clapped him lightly on the back and swallowed the words. "You look sharp," he managed. "You look tired," the younger man replied. "Vegas again?" "Vegas always," Dean said. The business didn't slow just because his bones did. Calls came at odd hours, bookers, producers, someone reminding him that this run at the casino is important, Dean. We've built the promotion around you. Contracts showed up on his desk with circles around dates. One weekend in red, Vegas show. On a different calendar, on a different wall, the same day was marked in blue ink, training flight. He could have moved the show. It crossed his mind. Just once. Then, a manager's voice over the line. "They're counting on you. You cancel now, we lose more than one night." He looked at both calendars, at the overlapping ink. Planes fly every day, he told himself. Kids come home. I do the job I've always done. The day before the flight, their conversation was shorter than it should have been. Dean Paul stood halfway out the door, keys in hand. "Call when you're down," Dean said, as if it were a casual favor. "Sure," his son answered. "You'll be in a tux by then, right?" "Probably." "Then think of it this way. I'm up there trying not to embarrass the air guard. You're down there trying not to embarrass the family name. High stakes all around." They both smiled. It wasn't a big moment, no music swelled, no sudden depth of confession. It was just two men who loved each other, each already late for where he had to be. "Land soft," Dean said. "I always do," Dean Paul replied. "You know that." Later, in the dressing room in Vegas, hanging up his jacket, Dean replayed that last grin for a heartbeat longer than usual. There was something unfinished in it, a sentence he might have added and didn't. By the time the casino dimmed its chandeliers and the spotlight found him, his son was already high over California. While he loosened his tie before the first number, the jet carved its pattern through cold air. When the house lights dropped and the curtain opened on that warm, smoky room, two stories were running at once. One under gold beams and applause. One in a sky he couldn't see. And when the phone finally rang backstage, it was those two timelines colliding, forcing him to decide which world he would stand in for the next 45 minutes. The applause that greeted his line rolled toward him like surf, warm and distant. It broke around the edge of the stage and went on into the dark, but none of it seemed to touch him. He stood there, exactly where the light put him, and everything beyond the first few rows flattened into shapes and color. The band picked up the next tune on cue. Saxophones slid into the melody, brushes whispered on the snare. Dean lifted the mic, the way his body had done thousands of times, and began to sing. From the back of the room it sounded right. The phrasing was easy, the timing intact. But in his own ears, he heard the difference. The words left his mouth and felt weightless, as if they belonged to someone else. Each line had to fight its way past three questions that kept circling the same point. Where is he now? Is he on the ground? Is he breathing? Down in the pit, the pianist glanced up. He'd seen the stage manager's face in the wings. His fingers stumbled for half a beat before he forced them back into the changes. The conductor's baton tremored once. Two waiters at the side rail slowed their usual glide, heads turning toward the stage and then away, unsettled without knowing why. Dean hit a high phrase he'd always floated through. Tonight, the note frayed. Just a hair, a tiny hitch. The room took it as charm, part of the old, a little too much to drink persona they loved. A couple in the third row grinned at each other. To anyone who knew his ear, it was something else. A man whose throat had tightened around a name he couldn't say. Between verses, he let his eyelids close longer than the song required. To the audience, it looked like he was sinking into the lyric. Behind his ribs, the silence of the headset backstage roared at him. What if they never find anything? What if the phone rings again and it's not a maybe anymore? He opened his eyes on the downbeat. At the left wing, just beyond the spill of the spotlight, the stage manager stood with his arms folded tight. When their gazes met, the man gave a slight, helpless shake of his head. No news. The gesture was small, but it hit like a dropped stone. Not a reprieve, not a verdict. Just the worst sort of middle. Nothing. Dean filled the space with patter. He stretched a joke that usually took 10 seconds into 30, adding a detail here, a shrug there, milking an extra ripple of laughter. Every added word was another moment stolen, another chance for someone to come running with a different expression on their face. Twice, he circled back to the same little line. "You folks doing all right out there?" As if he'd forgotten he'd already asked them. People shouted back, "Yeah, and we love you." It passed for banter. The trumpet player watched him with a furrow between his brows, waiting for a clear cue that didn't come. A woman at a front table leaned toward her companion. "He's off tonight," she whispered. Not bad, not sick, just not quite anchored. The laughs still came, but they were thinner at the edges. Applause rose a shade slower. A handful of faces turned toward the wings now and then, catching the nervous posture of the staff and not knowing what to do with it. Near the end of the number, he reached for the glass on the stool beside him, the one he always used for the traditional toast. His fingers closed around the stem, and for the first time that evening, the mask slipped in a way the room could have seen, if it had been looking for it. His hand shook, barely. A tremor that sent the ice against the side with a faint clink. One woman at the very edge of the stage saw it. Her smile faltered. For a heartbeat, her eyes met his, and something like understanding passed between them without language. He lifted the drink anyway, the light catching the amber, his face bathed in gold. Wrapped in brightness, with hundreds of people laughing in the dark below, he had the strangest sensation, not of standing in front of them, but of standing inside a space where someone had quietly turned the air down. He drew breath for the toast, knowing that after this one, there would be no more hiding from whatever waited beyond the curtain. For a moment after the song ended, nothing moved. No cymbal wash, no canned sting from the band. Just the low electric hiss of the sound system and the weight of hundreds of people waiting for what usually came next. A wisecrack, a toast, the easy reset before another tune. That silence wasn't on the running order. Out of the corner of his eye, Dean saw a shape detach itself from the shadows. The stage manager stepped closer to the edge of the light than he ever should have during a set, stopping just inside the golden spill. He didn't wave this time. He just stood there, head slightly bowed, a single sheet of paper hanging limp at his side. Their eyes met across the glare. Dean didn't need to read a word. It was there in the set of the man's jaw, in the way his shoulders had given up trying to look professional. No hopeful, tight smile. No, we're still waiting. Just that bare, unadorned look he'd seen on doctors and lawyers and priests when they had to open a door nobody wanted. The room stayed quiet, thinking this was timing, a veteran milking the pause. Inside, something in him gave way. Not a tear, not a collapse, just a clean internal break, like a bone finally snapping along a line that had been cracked for years. The hand holding the glass sank an inch before he forced it back up. The spotlight sliced across his face, half of it washed in gold, half slipping into shadow. According to the act, this was the moment for a light line before the band came back in. He could feel the orchestra poised behind him, waiting for the familiar cue. The audience leaned forward a little, trusting him to fill the gap, unaware that the next sound out of his mouth might be a raw, wordless noise he couldn't pull back. He had no room left for poetry, no strength for honesty, but the job still asked for him. He lifted the microphone, the metal cool against his fingers. "Well," he said, and heard his own voice from very far away. "If you folks are half as happy to be here as I am, then you're doing just fine tonight." It was light, almost breezy, exactly the sort of line they'd come expecting, an old-fashioned shrug wrapped in charm. It didn't belong to the man whose son had just vanished from the sky. It belonged to the character the posters still sold. The room broke like a dam. Laughter, applause, a few whistles. Glasses went up in answer to his. From their chairs, people thought, "He's still got it. Look at him, same as ever." He closed his eyes for the briefest instant, not as part of the act this time, but to survive the sound of that cheer scraping across the place where the news had just landed. When he opened them again, the decision was already finished inside him. He would finish this song, no more. After the last note, after the bow that the casino expected, he would walk off into the dark behind the curtain and not stop until someone told him, plainly, what had happened to his boy. For the rest of his life, people would talk about how steady he'd seemed that night, how gracious, how professional. They would say, with awe, that he kept the show going after hearing the worst thing a father can hear. What they couldn't see from their tables was that, in the space between that little joke and the first chord of the next number, he'd quietly laid the entertainer down and stepped forward as nothing more and nothing less than a man bracing himself to hear the cruelest sentence the world could form.